a song for you.
You're listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I will do one episode for each song the band recorded in the studio. However, this is a fan podcast and not band endorsed. It's more of a tribute to their long history, well beyond just the hits, and my way of giving something back to a band that has given so much to me. Let's dig in! Hello and welcome to another episode of Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin, here with another song from Deep Purple's In Rock album, or Deep Purple in Rock, depending on which side of the fence you're on. Either way, you know what's important is the music, and we're going to talk about that. The topic of today's song is pretty interesting. You can imagine, especially, think about like 1969, 1970. Drugs were kind of flowing. There was probably a huge element of people in the crowd that were on something or other. This is why you could get away with 20-minute drum solos that you can't do now, because the attention span completely different. But I would imagine in the course of all of that, band members would meet some pretty interesting people. Obviously, whether the band member was looking for sex or a groupie was looking for sex, typically at some point there's going to be a lot of that you're going to interact with throughout the course of a tour, especially, as you're getting more and more popular, as the band is reaching more heights. And it's interesting because when I had listened to older interviews with David Coverdale talking about the first few years of Whitesnake, and, he said it was mostly a male crowd that they had at their shows, and they're singing like love songs and songs about sex and whatever. But I look at the video footage I've seen from, the Mark I era, Mark II Part 1 era of Deep Purple. There's a good mix of men and women in the crowd. And I don't know if that was just a generational thing or if it's the band really had reached a wider spread audience than what Whitesnake had done in the beginning. So, there's going to be women at the show. You've got an all-male band. They're rock stars. Everybody's all hyped up on the music and whatever substance they're on. And you're going to have those groupie interactions. And that is what today's song is about. This one's called Live and Wreck. They would go back and touch on this theme again in a song on their Now What album called Après Vous. We'll get to that. When we get to that, it's going to be a little while. But let's check the album cover for the notes, the vast, expansive thoughts of the band on this song. It says, "It takes all sorts. Support your local groupie." And there you go. So that's kind of why I'm coming to it from the angle of, thinking about what it was like to be a touring band at this time and having the popularity that was growing for them. I mean, this album came out and just kind of exploded all over the place and really put them on a map that, Hush did, but this just took it to a whole new level. This is just a completely different style of music that they've grown into. So they're reaching a much wider audience. They're getting all these tours, and you're going to meet these people is the bottom line. But it's the song that we're here to talk about, and the music and all that good stuff. And I said in yesterday's episode that I think this could have been a good side 2 opener. Now, I don't disagree that Flight of the Rat works just fine. The order of the album works just fine. But thinking about, coming off of just Child in Time and how explosive it was and how crazy the ending and everything is, and it just kind of like has that haunting reverb and stuff that just fades out with the little volume swells and all that from Richie. Thinking about that, kind of fading into the next song, even though you'd have to flip the album over, flip the cassette over, just kind of having it like, come out of that reverb tail and then just into this, we're coming back from silence thing, I think would have really worked well. And it's a good, powerful song, I think, to start aside. We get Flight of the Rat, and that's fine. It's absolutely fantastic, and it works beautifully, but I think this one could have worked too. So if anything, I would have switched these two on the album. But either way, let's get into the song, because that's what we're here to talk about. Here is Live and Wreck. So you're starting off with this huge reverb on the drums, Ian Pace just kind of coming out of the darkness and turning the light on for the song, and it's really interesting how they just kill the reverb right at the end of that drum part as he's hitting that fill. The reverb is just gone. So we've gone the opposite of the way Child in Time ended, in that big wash of reverb and the notes that Richie's playing, and now we're coming in with just drums, lots of reverb, and it just kills it. So again, that's why I think it would have been a fairly good order of songs. But oh man, that organ, that is just such a killer sound, so powerful. Just feels like it's a cheetah coming out of nowhere to tear your face off. I think they mentioned that on the Deep Purple podcast about one of the songs. I don't think it was this one. I think it was a newer album review that they had compared the organ to a cheetah or a different animal. But it definitely feels like it's just coming to tear your face off. And that might be a good metaphor for the groupie that the song was inspired by. Oh, you know what it might have been? They might have mentioned it on the In Rock ratings episode. It might have been that. I still need to go back and listen to that, but I think it could have been that one. The other thing that's interesting about hearing the drums by themselves too is that we really get a sense of the reference for the drums because we don't have other instruments that are blending in together. And the more instruments you blend together, they all diminish a little bit in what cuts through. So it's nice to be able to hear the drums, how they sound, how powerful that kick really is, because it does get buried a little bit under some of the instruments. Listen to how brilliant and beautiful this riff is. It leaves so much open space. It doesn't play the last note that you expect it to. It just leaves that open. And that's really cool because it seems like, most riffs, they just have to fill up every amount of space. And I really like that this leaves room for this sound to just be open. And then Ian Pace doing a drum fill on just a bass drum. How often do you hear that without it being like a digga double bass kind of thing? Really interesting choice, but I've always really liked that one. And that actually, I used to practice that quite a bit. And it's one of the reasons that I started developing a very quick bass drum foot was doing things like that. This is really such an interesting composition musically. Obviously, we're getting a good gritty vocal. This is a storytelling song, and I've always loved that. But it's just the music behind it. So you've got Richie playing, and then you've got John filling in the second half. But they're really not playing any melody. They're just kind of filling in and putting some sound into the song so that it's not just drums and bass and vocals. But the real magic in this riff is coming from Roger. He's the one that's giving us the melody. He's playing low, then he's playing high, then he's playing low, then he's playing high, and he's playing with both Richie and John. And that's where the fire really comes from in this riff. And I like that. It certainly breaks up it has to be a guitar oriented song to be rock and roll, because it doesn't. And these guys really know how to just create interesting ideas and ways of performing a song. I'm realizing since the bass is so high in the mix, and I'm kind of thinking back to the other songs that we've listened to already, and when I've said, the song sounds so big and full musically, I think it's the way that they're mixing the bass in there, because the tone is very wide. It's not leaning towards one side. It feels like it's filling up both speakers. And I think that's part of why the vocals are sounding so quiet. Now, they could have pushed the vocals in the mix a little bit more on this album, whether there was effects or not. Here, we're not really getting vocal effects, but I still feel it's a little bit floating on the surface of the music instead of above it, if that makes sense. So you've got, like, normally vocals would be sitting on top of the music. The music would kind of dip down and make way for it, or they would just have like space in the way that they're writing to leave room for the vocal to cut through. Here, we really don't get that because the music is like full on all the time. So what we have instead is the vocals are, I almost think of it, okay, think of it like you're taking a bath. And normally you would be, mostly submerged underwater. Maybe your upper body, at least from the neck up, would be above the water. But imagine you took your head and put it down into the water and pointed your face up so that only your face was above the water. That's kind of the way I feel the difference is here. Ian's voice is very much just floating on the surface of the music instead of above it like you would normally have. And that may be the very first instance of a bathing comparison to hard rock music. I can't think of a more killer organ sound I've ever heard in music than that right there. This is just classic Ian Paice drumming right here with these just little gentle, one-handed rolls on the snare that kind of make it's not jazzy. It's not the right word, and I don't know what the right word is, but it's like judging it up a little bit. He could just be playing a straight beat here on the snare, kick, and hi-hat, and it would be fine. That would be what most drummers would do, but he's just putting that extra into it. And it really makes the song roll in a way that it wouldn't otherwise.
You said you were a virgin, though I promised and mystery, yeah. But I knew that you would bring me down, 'cause everyone calls you Big G, yeah.
Okay, so here's a little drummer tip. I've noticed that a lot of drummers these days don't keep time with their hi-hat foot. And it's really interesting how that used to be such a big thing and has kind of changed. But and I've had drummers say to me that they have a hard time learning how to do that, especially if, they've been drumming for a while and then trying to add that in as part of their normal playing. It really is a challenge, and I get that. So here's something that I can tell you. Listen back to this verse. This last verse, second verse of the song, and just tap it out on your hi-hat foot and then add the bass drums in. So you're just counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 on your hi-hat, right? Just a consistent up and down on that foot. And then on your other foot, you're playing boom, ba-boom, boom, boom, ba-boom, boom. If you can do that and get that down solid, you'll be able to do it. I guarantee you. One thing I love about the chorus, and you get a little bit of this in the verse, but the verse is a little more straightforward storytelling. The chorus is a little more sing-songy, I would say, but it's where Ian chooses to sustain notes, because he could just say, you better do something, but he's like, you better do something. And I really love where he's stretching out those syllables. It just adds such a cool dynamic. It makes it feel more meaningful, I think would be the right way to say it. If he's just singing, straightforward, just saying the words as they are, I don't think you would get the intensity to which he's expressing his feelings. I think you would just get a good story. And that's the difference between a storyteller and a song. I've heard a lot of people in songwriting say that it's not the just the notes that you play, it's the notes that you don't play. And here's a perfect example of that. If you listen through that solo section and you're following John Lord, he's really just playing very little. He's just filling in so that there's, not nothing. And he's not soloing, he's not doing any riffs or anything. He's just throwing in a little bit to fill in the sound. It's really interesting because he could have been just playing a riff behind what Richie was doing, but they really chose to follow along with keeping the song very open. And Richie's not playing anything fast or fancy. He's just playing really more tonal playing. And I love that. He could have put in a flashy solo that I don't think would have fit the tempo, but knowing Richie, he would have found a way to do something and make it cool. But he's just playing here really more emotion. And I really like that. The other thing that we get during this section that we haven't really had is the interesting use of a tambourine. I almost said tangerine. The reason I say interesting is because it doesn't just play eighth notes or quarter notes or half or whole note accents. It starts off like it's following the hi-hat, but then it really starts following the snare. And you're getting harder hits on the tambourine on those snare accents, even when Ian's playing extra snare hits that he's using for color. And I find that really interesting because I can't think, when you're listening to one song, it's hard to think of other songs, but I can't think of another instance where I've really heard tambourine do quite that kind of a performance. And I mean, I'll laugh if I start hearing it left and right in songs after I say that, because that seems to be the case. But it's really unique, and I think it just is again another. Okay, let's put a tambourine in here, but let's not just put a tambourine in here. Let's do something special with it. Let's do something that you wouldn't normally hear, and it shows again the creativity of these guys that are just so inventive and really shaping different ways that music can be performed. I love the intensity in this verse. We get a little bit heavier musically, but it's the vocal too. I really love the vocal in this one. And then those double crashes that we get from Ian Paice, I've always loved those. They're fun to play. I don't know. I can't explain why. Like I could try and find a way to justify why it's fun, but it's just fun. That's all there is to it. They're just fun to play those. But it just adds, again, just another level of something interesting. And he doesn't just do it once. He's repeating it a couple of times as accents. And it just works so well. They're just not, and I feel like I've said this a lot, and I probably have, but they're just not a copy-paste band. And that is, I think, a big part of why their music is so attractive to listen to. What the hell, Ian Paice? Is there a way you could have possibly made that fill more intense? I don't think so. Best snare fill ever. But this is another one of those songs I really wish I could just chase into that fade and find out what they did. I mean, they're on fire, and this is so exciting and so dramatic what they're playing. I really wish I knew, and it might be 2 more seconds that they play. I really don't know, but they're such a great jamming band, and they were playing so well at this point. It's hard not to want to chase that to wherever the actual conclusion was. And I know that I remember hearing an interview with Jon Lord where he said he was not a fan of fading out songs on albums. He said it's cheating because you can't do it live. And if you can't do it live, you shouldn't be able to do it on an album. And in general, I agree. But I think there are certain songs where you could make the argument that a fade is warranted. And as much as I'd love to chase this to the end, I think it fading out into oblivion here, I think it really works. And especially where we're headed into the next song, and we'll talk about that on Thursday, but where we're headed into the next song, I think it fits perfectly. And again, kind of making the argument for the song placement, the ending of this one going into our final proper album track does make perfect sense, I would say. But yeah, this is such a great song. Always been a favorite of mine. Absolutely love it. The sound of this album is so, just low end and rich, that a song like this just gets pushed to the next level with so much bottom end in it. Even though we're not getting, full wall to wall sound, we're getting a lot of space in here. It still sounds huge, and just amazing what they created with this album and with this song in particular, as far as the sonic quality goes. But I think a lot of the credit of that has to go to what Roger's playing. Just because he's filling in those spaces, but he's not just playing bottom end. He's playing melody too, or, higher register as well. And that gives the song just a great dynamic range. And it's really interesting how one decision can really change the feel of the song. If he were just playing eighth notes, in a lower range, just boom, 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 that would have been fine. But when you hear what he's playing during the verse, I mean, it would be a fairly, maybe straightforward, not really interesting. It's what he's doing on the bass during the verse that, along with the vocal, goes beyond just being supportive to the vocal. It's making the music interesting. So, big shout out to Roger for that. Ian Pace on this one, it's just playing some killer stuff. Great solos from John and Richie, of course, a great story and a great vocal from Ian Gillan. This is just a fantastic track. I hope you guys loved it. And as always, I would say, after you've listened to an episode of this, just go listen to the song by itself without me interrupting it, and just see how the song makes you feel. It's a great song. You could also listen to the song like, okay, you see today I'm covering Living Wreck, or that's the next song I'm going to cover. Listen to the song, then listen to the episode, then listen to the song again, and see if you maybe found some things in there that you didn't notice before that make you smile, or, whatever the case may be. But if I were listening to this podcast, that's how I might approach it. I might not, but that's how I might. So give it a try, see what works for you. But in any case, thank you guys for listening and joining me for another episode. It's a great song to cover. And let's see, tomorrow is Wednesday, so that'll be Haskincast Podcast. Then we're back on Thursday for our final proper album track, but far from the end of the season. We'll be covering Hard Lovin' Man. Yeah, we got a lot to talk about in that song. So for now, you guys have a great day. Join me tomorrow for the Haskincast Podcast. Cheers. Thanks for listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast, a tour of the entire Deep Purple studio recordings. Please remember to give the show a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Leave a comment and tell your friends. I also have a Patreon set up if you'd like to support the show. You can also write to me at smokeonthepodcast@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and thanks for listening.